Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. MrScottyMac here with an episode 1 of the Command Post. It's going to be a semi-regular EDH video deck tech series where I go through a bunch of my EDH decks as I build them, and that way you guys can see what I'm playing and either play them or some variations thereof. So first things first, we're going to go through my Sphinx Tribal deck. General Commander, none other by Shroom the Hegemon, of course. So I'm going to start with the mana base, since it seems to be been working very well for me. This will also give you a good picture into how I organize my decks and how I look at them from a top-down perspective. So first land real quick, Minimo, School at Water's Edge. Some of the important creatures are legendary, so it makes sense to be able to give them pseudo-vigilance. Next one, of course, Bojuka Bog, needs no explanation. Halimar Depths, which is a really good card for obviously brainstorming or pseudo-brainstorming or pseudo-topping, as it were. A lot of the guys are really fat and huge in the deck, so of course Temple of the False God makes a lot of sense. And since your guys are really big, sometimes you need some defense, so we've got the Maze of Ith, and along with Maze of Ith, its semi-good partner, Core Haven. Now this of course also works with Minimo, since it is a legendary land, along with this land right here, Academy Ruins, which of course belongs in just about any deck that happens to run artifacts, and blue mana. And this deck likes to draw a crap ton of cards, so of course we go with Reliquary Tower, Pseudo Spellbook. So, since it is an artifact-based deck, we've of course got to have the regular complement of artifact lands. So you've got Ancient Den for white mana, you've got Vault of Whispers for black mana, and you have Seed of the Synod for blue mana. So those are all, of course, in there to help with Metalcraft, as well as get your artifact count up a little higher. And then, of course, we get into the dual lands. So we've got an Underground Sea, we have a Scrubland, a Tundra, and then, of course, you've got the shock lands of the same color varieties. So you've got Watery Grave, Godless Shrine, and Hallowed Fountain. Okay, the mana base in this, it does require a lot of 3-color, but what you'll find is a lot of it's base blue first and foremost. So that's sort of, as you'll see a little bit later with some of the other lands I've selected, why that makes a lot of sense. So of course we've got the fetches to find them. We've got the Flooded Strand, Polluted Delta, and the Marsh Flats. Okay, now we wanted some selection of flexibility in terms of our land, so we did pick some that could give us any color. So you've got the obligatory Command Tower. You of course have the Reflecting Pool, the Arcane Sanctum. Also not irrelevant is that if you take a look at the flavor text therein, we must rely on our own knowledge, not on the dogma of the Seekers or the mutterings of the Sphinxes. So the first way that I went through this deck is every single card that had the word Sphinx on it, flavor text or otherwise, I had to play. The only exception to that, of course, being Sphinx's Agent, which is the 1 blue artifact creature from Shards of Alara, because he himself is not actually a Sphinx, so therefore he couldn't be in the creature pile. So now we've got the bounce lands. So I've opted only for 2 bounce lands, Azorius Chancery and the Dimir Aqueduct. And the reason for that strictly is because, like I said, blue is the primary focus for the deck, and I found that by having the Orzhov Basilica as well as the filter land that didn't produce blue, I found that more often than not it was just a useless card when I wanted to cast all the blue cards in my hand. So we of course followed the same rule with the filter lands from Shadow War. Now, as far as the basics go, I do have one of each Swamp and Plains, just in case somebody decides to path, or one of those effects come out where you get to search for basics and whatnot, and sometimes you just want to color fix it. So we did that, and then in addition to that, to round it out, we have some islands, precisely 7, in fact. Okay, so that's the mana base. And then we'll get into the nuts and bolts, which of course is everyone's favorite breed of fatty, Sphinxes. So as we work our way up the curve, we've got first Sphinx being Conundrum Sphinx. So it's a 4/4 flyer for 4. Totally not unreasonable. Almost all the creatures in this deck fly. As a matter of fact, all the creatures in this deck fly, so you know, a 4/4 is still pretty good. I do also play Future Sight in the deck, so it allows you to kind of draw free cards off that if you can. Argent Sphinx, of course, a 4/3 blocker with Metalcraft. Any non-tramplers, it's Stone Colds, so that's pretty good. Petra Sphinx, thanks Ben, shout out to you. This is a Sphinx from Legends. It says tap, target player names a card and then turns over the top card of his or her library. If it matches the named card, the card is put in the player's hand, otherwise it's put in the graveyard. And it's a 3/4. This is actually the only creature without flying in the entire deck. I was mistaken. Next we have Isperia the Inscrutable, which is a 3/6 flyer for 5 mana, which is very reasonable. And of course, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, name a card. That player reveals his or her hand. If he or she reveals a named card, search your library for creature card with flying, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle your library. Allows you to find whatever Sphinxes you need for whatever moment. Sphinx Summoner. Obviously, now we're into the 5s here, so a 3/3 flyer that tutors up a creature, or an artifact creature rather. Bell Tower Sphinx, because it's a Sphinx, and milling is a thing. And actually, I have milled out. I've won a number of my games with this deck through milling. Sphinx of Lost Truths, of course. Ancestral Recall on a guy. Sarah Sphinx, arguably the worst creature in the deck. 4/4 Vigilance for 5. Sphinx of Magosi, 6/6 for 6. Of course, everyone's favorite. It's got the ability to draw a card and put a 1/1 counter on him, so that can get out of hand pretty quickly. Also, to be noted in the 6-drop slot, we of course have Shroom. Okay? We also have Jawar Sphinx. So 5/5 Flying Shroud. Look at the top card of your library. You'll notice that the library manipulation is extremely important in this deck. Consecrated Sphinx. All blue decks should not leave home without it. Cerulean Sphinx. So it's a 5/5 for 6. It's got flying, and at will, basically for 1 blue mana, the owner can shuffle it into his or her library. So this doesn't really get stolen very well because you can just bounce it back into the library. So Sharding Sphinx, 4/4. So obviously there's a lot of artifact creatures in here, and there'll be a little bit more as you see along the way. So putting in lots of chump Thopters is always a good thing. Sphinx Ambassador. So this is a lot of fun. This is basically bribery on a flying dude, and it works out really well very often since everything plays singletons. Factor Fiction Sphinx. So Sphinx of Bethune, 5/6 flyer, Factor Fiction. Can't play Sphinxes without Magister Sphinx. Also, traditionally can't play Sphinxes without Goliath Sphinx, which is an 8/7 flying. Now, this one I was really impressed with to find out that it actually was a Sphinx, and I was really impressed. Chancellor of the Spires from New Phyrexia. So this actually comes with the ability to steal a card from your opponent's graveyard and play it for free, which is pretty awesome. So also you can have everyone mill 7 if you reveal them from your opening hand. One of my favorite cards in the deck actually is Enigma Sphinx. I love the Cascade Lottery, and any EDH it's even funner. And of course here you've got a 7-drop, so you can play any number of the huge cards underneath it. Sphinx Sovereign, probably one of the worst Sphinxes for 8 mana, 6/6 flyer, life gain or loss. And then the last one, of course, is the Sphinx of the Steel Wind, or Achroma, as everyone likes to call it. That's CHROMA, right. So those are the creatures. And so what the deck does really well is it draws a lot of cards. It's a blue deck, and it should naturally. So what I've done is, here's all the card draw spells. I got Top in this pile because basically that's what it does. It fixes your draws to make sure you're drawing cards, and you can also draw your extras if you need to. Brainstorm, which is an instant at 1 blue, of course. Draws 3 and puts 2 from your hand on top. Everyone's favorite card. Whispers of the Muse. So it's draw a card with buyback. That's a buyback 5, in case you don't know what it is. So for 6 mana, you can just repetitively draw cards. Limdual's Vault, which is one of my all-time favorite library manipulators. You'll notice that all of these spells are also instant speed, which is completely relevant. Thirst for Knowledge. Draw 3, discard 2 unless you discard an artifact card. Instant. Factor Fiction. We discussed the Tenets of Fact or Fiction earlier. Blue Sun Zenith, so instant card draw as well. And Future Sight. So it allows me to play with the top card of my library revealed, which works out really well and plays with a bunch of other draws like the Petra Sphinx and so on and so forth. So we've got all of that there. Now, obviously Sphinxes take a lot of mana to ramp up to, and we want to make sure that we've got a lot of it at any given moment. So we play a good chunk of mana rocks as well as our land base. So first and foremost, I play Lotus Bloom, and which is actually really awesome and is part of an infinite mana combo that sits in the deck. Soul Ring, Mana Vault. Now all of these are high yield colorless artifacts for extremely low cost. Coalition Relic, because it does a really good job of fixing mana. Sometimes 8 alone can get you 2 different colors of mana in one turn, which is great. And then of course Gilded Lotus. So those are the mana rocks. Now, in addition to that, I like to play Planeswalkers. There's no secret that it's a lot of fun. And Jace was one of my favorite cards of all time, so I had to make sure that I played all incarnations of Jace. So there's Baby Jace. There's Papa Jace. And here's who I like to affectionately call Uncle Jace, the new Jace from M12. Every time I have played that card in EDH, I have fired off his ultimate. And I have won. So people just let this live on the table if you don't mill arbitrarily with it. And if you're building up, they just assume you're going to let them draw cards too. I recommend you do so because it lets you get away with it more often. So in addition to the Jaces, there's no secret, I love Tezzeret. So there's a good chunk of artifacts in the deck, so this allows you to find them. Plus his ultimate is definitely a finisher in this deck. Tezzeret the Seeker, so the other Tezzeret, does allow you to search up artifacts, allows you to untap artifacts, whether that's guys or mana rocks, it's good. And of course his ultimate can win games as well. And then of course Venser. So you'll notice the buyback, Whispers of the Muse earlier was a bit of an issue, and you notice there's a high volume of instants in the deck. Venser can get away, he can steal games on his own. There's a couple of good Sphinxes that are worth bouncing with his +1, or +2 rather. All of the Sphinxes are huge, so making them unblockable is definitely a way to end a game. And if you can ever get his emblem, you will win because you have more cards and more instants than anyone else on the table. So that goes for them. Now we get into some of the more utility artifacts. So first and foremost, we got to get into the graveyard hate. So Tormod's Crypt, totally mandatory, reusable and abusable. We draw a lot of cards, and I don't like discarding, so Library of Lang, yes, that's a hot-ass beta version, but that's why I play it over Spellbook, is because if I need to discard, I can discard to the top of my deck instead. Sculpting Steel, no Shroom deck could be complete without it, and also a piece of the ultimate infinite mana combo. Mind Block Orb. Now you'll notice, of course, if you read the flavor text, this is why this card made the cut. Rogue mechanists once rummaged through the wastes of the Tide Hollow, constructing unauthorized golems to threaten the hegemony of the Sphinxes. The orbs put a stop to that. So, of course, this also stops people from searching their libraries, and that's also why there's no actual dedicated tutor spells that are in the deck at all. So now we get into Salvaging Station. Now this is the last, this is the last piece along with Shroom to the infinite broken unlimited mana. If you use Salvaging Station with a Lotus Bloom and Shroom and Sculpting Steel, you can use Shroom and Sculpting Steel to generate an infinite number of creatures going to the graveyard triggers. And you can then just use the Salvaging Station to bring back the Lotus Bloom, sacrifice the Lotus Bloom, and then when the guy dies, untap Salvaging Station and do it all over again. So you can create an infinite loop for mana, which you can use to a bunch of different effects. We talked about the instants and how buyback and all of them are relevant. Sphinx Bone Wand. Yes, it says Sphinx in the title. Yes, it made the deck. And yes, this card is legit. In this deck, this card is scary as hell. You first use it to just incrementally kill off all of the little utility guys that sit on the table. And then once it gets up to about 5 or 6, you should be able to put somebody away with your handful of instants. This card is amazing. Alright. So now we get into some of the removal. So again, we tried to stick with instants for the most part. So I've got Swords to Plowshares here, which is of course a 4th edition that has been charmingly altered by Durfington, David Lee. So there's the work that he did for me on that. And then, of course, we've got Dispeller's Capsule. So basically disenchant on a brick, but of course it does cost 1 mana, so it is returnable with the salvaging station. Similarly, we've got X-Cap for the same reason, so you can kill a non-black creature, and it's got 1, so you can, of course, machine gun permanents off the table, so long as they're not black. Proteus Staff, because I feel like these days tucking is a really big, important part of the game. So this you can use to either cash in one of your smaller Sphinxes or a token and turn it into a big boom boom. So conversely, you could also tuck opponents' generals. Last but not least, in the removal subject, any blue mage never leaves home without Capsize. So yes, if you have Capsize in your hand and you happen to run off your 4-card infinite combo, Capsize is a really good way to make everybody quit. But Capsize is also a lot of fun when you have Venser emblem, or if you've got Sphinx Bone Wand on the table. So generally I like to use this just as a defensive removal spell or a proactive way to stick my guys through into the red zone. So use it however you'd like, though. So along with that, we've got some counter magic. So because no blue, this obviously is a control deck and it plays as such. So Pact of Negation is number 1. Now, this is KYT's edition, and definitely a welcome one, and it's been really awesome every time that I've had it in my hand, is Stifle. There's a lot of activated and triggered abilities that are completely worthwhile stopping for 1 blue mana, so it's been really good. This is a recent addition to Spell Burst. You'll notice this is, yes, a counter spell with buyback, so as we get into talking about reusing spells in instance, this is a really good one for that. And it also allows you to counter spells with it early in the game without worrying about it, because you can just buy it back and save it for a big one later. Alright, Memory Plunder. This is the spell that's attached to the Chancellor of the Spires. This is the one that allows you to play an instant or sorcery card in an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost, and it's an instant. You'll notice, of course, the plethora of blue mana that are required to cast it, as we talked about my land selection earlier. Cryptic Command. So this is the Swiss Army knife of the Blue Mage. And of course the last one is Force of Will. Yes, this is a gold bordered Force of Will. My mint one is in a case that I don't want to shuffle. So there you go. And last but not least, we've got a small selection of just generally good cards. So we've got, this is my favorite card to play after Uncle Jace ultimating. You Identity Crisis somebody. So you make somebody draw 20 cards, and then you Identity Crisis them, and they cry all the way home. It's really funny. Oblivion Stone, because you need to blow up the world sometimes, and there's no real other sweeper in the deck, so I thought that it would be a good one to use. So this is a thematic Sphinx card. Mask of Riddles. So clearly a Sphinx card. Basically, it turns everything into the Shadow Mage Infiltrator, which is fine. A lot of the guys fly and they all have evasion, so giving them fear and letting you draw more cards is always good, and it's a pretty cheap artifact anyway. We also get into Telepathy. Ben, thank you for the foil. Your opponent's player with their hands revealed. It's like bringing a gun to a knife fight. Being able to just know what everyone else has in their hand, knowing what you have to counter and what threats are relevant, is completely amazing, and it's been a really good good cornerstone of the deck. And the last 2 cards, of course, Thopter Foundry, Sword of the Meek. So the Sphinxes are really big, and I find that sometimes they just don't get there, and sometimes other decks are just faster than you, so being able to gain the life back here with Thopter Foundry and just generate a stream of blockers has been really, really good. And of course, like I said to you earlier, using both the Tezzeret's ultimates with any length of time that these cards have been on the table is often game over. You turn all of your Thopters into 5/5s, or you just drain somebody for a shit ton of damage. So that's the Sphinx deck as a whole. I hope you guys have enjoyed the time here on the command post, and look forward to your comments, and we'll do it again. Thanks.